the other day I uploaded a video that's talking about how we know about Socrates, and we have the three sources of information from Socrates. We have Plato, who is the most significant, most replete with information. We have Xenophon, and then we also have Aristophanes. He is the playwright. And since doing that video, I decided to do a little more digging on Aristophanes and his relationship to Socrates and to Plato. And it's really quite interesting that there's a lot more to it than I included in that first video. So I just wanted to kind of fill that in with the information that I've learned since. You may have remembered, if you watched that first video, that we learned about Socrates through Aristophanes' play The Clouds. And The Clouds is a play that features Socrates as one of the main characters. But the other main characters are a father and a son, a guy named Strepsiades and another guy, his son, named Pheidippides. And these two folks are basically, they're both clamoring for Socrates' attention and trying to get him to teach them to basically be a sophist, essentially. So I mentioned in the other video that one of the things that is leveled against Socrates in that play is that Socrates is essentially equivalent to the pre-Socratics. You know, he's pretty much all about cosmology, all about the big picture of the world, what the world is made out of, that sort of thing. The kind of things that the pre-Socratics were really interested in. And he was also essentially a sophist. He taught people how to win arguments and taught people how to be dishonest, essentially. So that's what we learn about Socrates from The Clouds. But there's so much more to it that I didn't even quite understand until just recently. Another source for this is a lecture by Robert Bartlett, I think is his name. I'll try to link it in the comments because it's pretty good. And what he basically argues is that The Clouds, or Aristophanes, was sort of right in his judgment about Socrates, but he's dealing with a younger Socrates. And Socrates at that time hadn't kind of made his jump into the sort of philosophy that he was known for, and he was kind of along the lines of the people who were his predecessors. So it's really interesting to think that while this play is critical of Socrates, it may be actually sort of accurate along with other representations of him that might seem contradictory because it's dealing with a different time, a different element of Socrates' life. So what I think I would like to do in this is kind of go over a real brief overview of what The Clouds were like, what the play is like. If you want to listen to it, it's on LibriVox. The whole thing takes about an hour and a half. It's really quick, worth listening to. So I'll go over it real quick, and then I'm going to sort of take some of the implications of the play as it pertains to Socrates, and then also as it pertains to some other of the Platonic works. So the main crux of the play itself is that there is a guy who basically spent himself into debt because his son was like really into horses. So he bought a bunch of horse stuff and carriages and horses and stuff. So he's in a lot of debt, and he hears about this guy who is Socrates, who can teach someone to essentially talk their way out of issues in court. And that's a common thing that the sophists and that the rhetoricians claimed that they could do. Even in the Platonic dialogues, for instance, the Protagoras and the Gorgias, these are examples where these people make these claims, like they can do this. So Socrates is lumped in with them, and this guy says, all right, Pheidippides, his son, you got to go and you got to learn from Socrates how to do this evil stuff, or this unjust stuff, maybe is a better way of putting it. And Pheidippides says, no, I'm not going to. And his dad, Strepsiades, says, well, okay, then I'll do it. So he goes to Socrates, and it's a comedy, as you may be aware. And we're introduced to first one of Socrates' students. And he's talking about all the wonderful work that's being done in this thinkery, or whatever it's called, this school essentially, and it's all really silly stuff. Basically, like learning how many feet a flea jumps, so he makes little shoes for a flea, and then uses those shoes to measure how far the flea jumps, or to learn whether a gnat makes its noise from its mouth or from its butt. Just really silly things. They're supposed to make Socrates look silly. They're supposed to make this whole thing. And so he's learning about Socrates and ultimately meets him, and Socrates in this play, which is significant, denies the existence of the gods. And that comes up later, but it's just important that I add it here. He teaches Strepsiades that there is no Zeus. And essentially, after Strepsiades talks for long enough, Socrates realizes that he's an idiot, sends him away. Strepsiades then goes back to his son, Pheidippides, and says, go, you have to go, I don't care what you say. He says you're going to get kicked out if you don't go. And he goes, and Socrates is successful with Pheidippides. In fact, Pheidippides comes out of the thinkery being able to do the very thing that Strepsiades wants him to do. Unfortunately, since he's been taught to basically make unjust gains over everybody, he decides, well, to use that in other areas of his life. And essentially, he starts, beating his dad, and his dad's like, why are you doing this? And then he uses his rhetoric to essentially defend himself, and successfully defends himself. But it's a straw too far when he promises to do the same thing to his mother. Strepsiades, who is, again, the father, says that, that this is too much, and he goes and burns down Socrates' school. And that's where it ends. I should add there's a little interlude, which is significant, in the middle somewhere, when Pheidippides is doing his learning. There's a little interlude where justice and injustice incarnate have this conversation, and they're basically both arguing that they're right, that they're the best, and in that, injustice wins. Injustice wins out, and he's basically, is the winner of the argument. And again, that's significant for later, but I just wanted to add that was in there. So, where we're left off, Socrates' school is in shambles, burned to the ground, and the play essentially ends. So, as I said in the previous video, we're left to believe that Socrates is pretty much a sophist and pretty much concerned strictly with cosmological things, with how the earth moves. Not really worried about politics, not really worried about ethics, metaphysics, which is what we know of him in Plato is the exact opposite, right? Socrates is very, very unenthused about rhetoric and sophistry, and very unenthused about cosmology. So we have this disparity of Socrateses. And what the lecture that I listened to brings up, and I had never noticed this while I had read the book, is in the Phaedo, which is the very chronologically the last thing we know about Socrates, because this is the dialogue that he actually ends up drinking the hemlock and dying. Socrates does bring up the fact that he did essentially apply himself to natural sciences and to these sorts of things, and earlier in his life, and it just didn't work out. He said that basically, I just wasn't very good at it, so I tried something else. And what the other thing that he tried is the stuff that he's really famous for. So that leads us to believe that there was a time in Socrates' life that he did at least dabble in the sorts of things that Aristophanes suggests that he did. So that gives some credibility to those claims. So it's likely that that these criticisms may not be far off. In fact, Aristophanes is often credited for the basically predicting Socrates' death. Basically we have this parent who's concerned or upset that Socrates corrupted his son, and that's pretty much exactly why he dies. We have a bunch of people that are upset that Socrates is corrupting the youth and disbelieving in the gods. Those are the two main charges that are brought up against him. Now, another interesting thing to indicate that maybe there wasn't as much bad blood between Socrates and the poets in general, but Aristophanes in particular is that in the symposium, Socrates, now of course we don't know if this has actually happened, or if these groups ever really occurred. In the symposium, Socrates is rather friendly to Aristophanes, and that's got to be worth something. Plato did not make these men enemies in his writing, so we have a reason to believe that while there was some joking and while there was some criticism, we have reason to believe that maybe there wasn't as much bad blood as one might think with these sorts of things. Now, another really important consideration that I want to go over before we finish up here is this debate between justice and injustice that we see in the clouds. Because if you've seen any of my other videos on the Republic, you know that I believe the Republic is written largely in response to a lot of the stuff that the poets are saying, and largely, probably, largely against Homer, but there's got to be also this essence of response to Aristophanes' claims here as well. And this section where justice and injustice, they kind of go at it, and injustice wins, is mirrored in the Republic, where Socrates in the very beginning, maybe book 2, has this situation where justice and injustice are pitted against each other again, and it looks really bad. It looks really bad for justice, because essentially, injustice has everything. Everything is going well for the unjust man, and for the just man, things are not going so well. And Socrates has to defend the situation with those terms. And there's a lot of mirrors in these two cases. And I think it's probably best for another video, but I really just wanted to point out that the same way that Aristophanes pits justice and injustice together, Socrates or Plato does the same thing in the Republic and comes up with a different answer. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about. I'm hoping to maybe throw up a couple more videos to this end, but if you've got any questions, let me know. I've been really interested in this relationship recently, and I'm going to probably move on to Xenophon as well, because there's a lot more to it than I had at first expected. So I'm hoping to do a couple more videos. But if you have any questions, let me know. I'd be happy to kind of tailor the next videos to questions or to concerns or to disagreements. So yeah, thanks a lot. I'll talk to you soon.